All right, can everyone hear me all right? Yes? Cool. All right, guys. Hello, my name is Patrick, and I'm going to be your teacher today. And today we are going to learn about comparison and contrast writing. So, let's get started. All right, when you are writing your essays, sometimes your teacher might ask you to write a comparison contrast essay. So today let's learn what that is. What is comparison and contrast? Comparison shows how two or more things are similar. Show the ways that two things are related, they are similar, what they have in common. Contrast shows how two or more things are different, so you show the differences between two things. Alright, in most writing situations, the two related processes are used together. Very good point here. You're not usually just going to write how things are different. You're not usually going to write how things are the same. You're going to write both. You're going to write how two things are different and similar. An analogy explains one thing by comparing it to a second, more familiar thing. Analogies are very, very common in writing. You will see times that if there's a concept or something people might not understand, they compare it to something else so people understand it better. All right, moving right along. Okay, establishing a basis for comparison. The two things to be compared must have enough in common to justify the comparison. This is extremely important. When you're writing an essay, you need to make sure that you pick two things that you can compare or you can contrast. If you pick two completely random things like dogs and the moon, your essay isn't going to make any sense. You need to pick things that have something in common. Okay? So maybe dogs and cats, or the moon and the earth, something like that. Don't pick things that are completely different, okay? Also, you need to pick something that you have enough to talk about. So, if you're writing a short essay, pick two things that are similar. If you have a long essay, pick something that is more complicated. All right, next. In making comparisons, you should move beyond the obvious, i.e. people and bees. What they mean here is, if you compare something like people and bees, there are obviously going to be lots of things that are different. People are large, intelligent creatures. Bees are small insects. It's not going to make any sense. You need to compare things that have something you can compare. So maybe what you could do is bees and ants, two things that have something in common. Don't just pick things that are completely different. Your essay won't make any sense. Lastly, when two things are very similar, it's the contrast that might be worth writing about. Very good point. If you pick two things that are really close, don't just state what is close about them. Tell what is different. Your essay will be based on differences rather than similarities. Alright, so remember, pick two things that it makes sense to compare. If you just pick two random things, your essay isn't going to make any sense. So, the topics you choose are very, very, very important. Okay, searching points for discussion. Okay, determine your emphasis on similarities, differences, or both. So decide if you're going to talk about what they have in common, what they have different, or both. Almost always, you'll do both. It's a lot easier. But remember what we said. If you pick things that are very, very similar, talk about their differences. Likewise, if you pick things that are very different, talk about their similarities. Next, determine the major focus of your paper. Always when writing, you need to make sure you have a point. The most important thing when writing an essay or a paragraph is having a point to it. Don't just put words on a page. No one will want to read it, and it won't make any sense. Small technical detail. 1 second, guys. Something wrong. Okay. Sorry, guys. Sorry for the interruption. Sometimes computers don't work like they're supposed to. Alright, where were we? Oh, yes. Okay. When you pick the subject, the focus of your paper, you need to make sure that it has a point, and you need to emphasize that point. So here's what we're going to do. If you look on the right side of the screen over here, we compare novel A and novel B. The focus of our paper is, there are three of them: major characters, minor characters, and themes. If you look on both sides with both novel A and novel B, we look at the major characters first, then the minor characters, then the themes. These are the focus points of our essay. You need to make sure that if you talk about major characters on one side, you also talk about major characters on the other side. Stay focused. Pick what you want to talk about and stay on that subject. The more focused your paper, the more faithful you are to what you want to talk about, it's going to be way better. Stay focused, stay on subject. Lastly, guys, make sure you treat the same or similar elements for each subject you will discuss. I just talked about that. If you talk about novel A's major characters, be sure you talk about novel B's major characters. And the next slide is going to discuss that. Alright guys, very, very, very important. Do not discuss entirely different elements for each subject. Example, novel A, if you discuss major characters, don't then discuss the plot of novel B. It's not going to make any sense. Then if you discuss the minor characters of novel A, don't talk about the author's life of novel B. Look at this little diagram we have here. One side we have major characters, minor characters, themes. The other side we have plot, author's life, and symbolism. Those are all interesting things, but that's not what you want to talk about. Let's go back to the last slide. Remember, if we have major characters on one side, we have major characters on the other. If we have minor characters, minor characters. Stay on topic. Stay with the theme. And if this is confusing, don't worry. We're going to work through an essay later that'll help you understand this a little bit better. Okay, so remember, if you discuss one aspect, stay on topic. Major characters, not major characters and plot. Doesn't work. Won't make any sense. Okay. Formulating a thesis statement. It's a complicated way to say something simple. Thesis statement is what you're going to talk about. So, let's figure out how we come up with what we're going to talk about. Okay. Identify not only the subjects to be compared and contrasted in your essay, but the point you will make about them. Very, very, very important. When you write an essay, don't just compare and contrast. You need to say why you're doing this or what we learn from this. Every essay you write needs to have a point. There needs to be a reason you are writing this, and just because your teacher tells you to isn't a good reason. You need to have a point to your paper. So, in the first paragraph or the first sentence, depending how long the paper is, you need to say what will be compared, what will be contrasted, and what we learn. 3 things. Next, also indicate or say whether you will be focusing on the similarities or differences or the balance between the two. Once again, we said earlier, if you're talking about similarities, say it. If you're talking about differences, say it. If you're talking about both, say it. State what you're going to do. This not only will help your reader understand what you're writing, it will help you write it because you will have a guide to what you're going to say later. So, if you pick 2 things that are close, you might want to talk about the differences. If you pick 2 things that are very, very different, talk about the similarities, or both. Most times you'll do both. Alright, and now we have a sample. Here's a good sentence. Although Melville's Moby Dick and London's The Sea Wolf are both about the sea, the minor characters, major characters, and themes of Moby Dick establish its greater complexity. This is really complicated, so let's work through this. Okay, guys, so we have 2 books here, Moby Dick and The Sea Wolf. And what we're going to talk about here is how Moby Dick's characters' major themes are different from the Sea Wolf's. So, Both books are about the sea. We've established a similarity. But here we're going to talk about differences. So then we're going to say which type of differences we're going to talk about. Minor characters, major characters, and themes. So remember, when you talk about it, stay on topic. So talk about differences between the minor characters of Moby Dick and the minor characters of the Seawolf. And then talk about the differences between the major characters of Moby Dick and the major characters of the Seawolf. And last, talk about the differences between the themes of Moby Dick and the themes of the Seawolf. And all of this, all of it together, works to prove that Moby Dick's minor characters, major characters, and theme give it greater complexity. So, in the rest of your essay, you need to do two things. Number one, you need to show how they're different. And number two, you need to say how it gives the book greater complexity, which is a really complicated idea. As I understand, you're still working on learning English, so this is very complicated, but we have a sample essay we can go over. So, up next, structuring a comparison and contrast essay. Once again, every essay has to have structure. Think of an essay almost like a math problem. There's a formula. You have A, you have B, you have C. Essays have the same thing. So, let's learn how we structure these. First one, subject by subject. Write a separate essay about each subject. The two things we'll be comparing and contrasting. But you discuss the same points for both subjects. Example, what we learned earlier. You have novel A and novel B, and you talk about the major characters of novel A and the major characters of novel B, the minor characters of novel A, the minor characters of novel B, etc. So what you would do here is you write two completely separate essays, but you look at the same things in both. So you'd write one essay entirely about novel A and talk about its main characters, its minor characters, and its theme, and then you write a completely different essay on novel B, talk about the major characters, the minor characters, and the theme. So two separate essays. Next up, use basis for comparison to guide your selection of points. Okay, once again, this is complicated. When you decide to compare and contrast something, you have to choose what you're going to compare and contrast, such as major characters, minor characters, and theme. So, when you select these, you need to look at what you want to say. So, if we go back to the last slide, we have this green, the point. That will help you decide what the blue is going to be and what the red is going to be. So compared and contrast the point, you have red, you have blue, you have green. So let the green, the point of the essay, help you decide your points such as minor characters, major characters, and theme. Okay, that's really complicated, but don't worry, we'll go over an essay that will help you with this. Okay, next up we have arrange points in logical order, usually order of importance. Brilliant! When you pick your themes, such as major characters, minor characters, and themes, the order that you put them in is important. It might not seem it, but it is. And usually you need to put what is most important first. So, if major characters is the most important difference or similarity, first. If the theme is the most important similarity or difference, first. What is most important goes first. And the last point of this slide, the subject-by-subject method, which we've just discussed, is good for short, uncomplicated papers, which is probably what you're writing now. So this is the most important one to learn. Okay, now, the last one we had was subject-by-subject. A different way of writing your paper is called point-by-point. This kind is good for longer, more complicated papers. Alright, so, make a point about one subject, then follow it with a comparable point about the other subject. Okay? You would say something like, Moby Dick is about the sea. Next sentence, The sea wolf is also about the sea. Next sentence. Kind of something like that. You immediately compare and contrast one after the other, after the other, after the other, alternating. Talk about one book, talk about the next one. Talk about one book, talk about the next one. Okay, the last point of this is the most important. Be careful not to fall into a monotonous or boring back and forth movement between points. To avoid this problem, vary sentence structure as you move from point to point. That's saying make your sentences interesting, elsewise your paper will be really, really boring. Point-by-point papers tend to be boring every time, but if you make your paper interesting and you use good words, it won't be boring. This is very important because these papers tend to become boring if you don't do that. So, use good English, use interesting words, and your paper won't be boring. If you don't, it's going to be super boring, and anyone who reads your paper is going to fall asleep. Okay, using transitions. This says see list on page 43. That doesn't help. Let's just talk about transitions, though. Transitions are phrases or sentences that move you from one topic to the next. These are really important because they can help give your paper a sense of flow. Think of a paper almost like a river, in the sense of it starts somewhere and flows out. And if you don't have a transition, the river will stop and then continue. But that's not what you want. You want it to flow continuously. So use sentences that tie one thing into the next. One thing into the next. And your English book should have a list of these. It does say that longer essays have entire paragraphs that connect one point to the next, but you're not going to have to worry about that for a while. Okay, so here is a sample essay. So all of that we just talked about are the ideas behind this, and they might not make any sense right now, so let's go over this essay and we will learn through practicing. Okay, so let's read this. We need 2 plays too. Title: fast-paced, action-filled, dramatic, fanciful. These words describe modern-day movies, our most prevalent, or common, form of entertainment. In a sense, movies are an upgrade of plays, which have been a source of entertainment since antiquity. Antiquity means a really long time ago. Some people feel that movies have so many advantages over live theater that theater will ultimately disappear as an important form of entertainment. However, since specific benefits can be attributed to movies and plays, both forms will endure. Okay, so that is our first paragraph. Let's work through this. First off, and a little aside, the beginning, fast-paced, action-filled, dramatic, fanciful. Don't start your papers like that. It makes you sound silly. So, choose something different. For example, just cut that out and talk about modern day movies being the most common form of entertainment. Those like one-word sentences, sound silly. Okay, back to what we were talking about before. Okay, if you look at point number 1 right here, it says identifies the subjects being compared, movies and plays. In the very beginning of your paper, you absolutely need to say what you're going to talk about. So here it says, in a sense, movies are an upgrade of plays. Brilliant. In that little sentence, or that half a sentence, we have said movies and plays, what we're going to be talking about. And we have already made a point that movies are an upgrade of plays. So we know that we're going to be talking about how they are different, how movies might be better than plays. But let's see. The second point says establishes a clear reason for the comparison. Okay, now you need to say why we need to talk about this. And here it says, some people feel that movies have so many advantages over live theater that theater will ultimately disappear as an important form of entertainment. So it's saying that people think movies are so much better that no one will go see plays, so plays will disappear. Which shows that this is the reason why we're comparing these. We're going to learn about plays and movies, and we're going to disprove this. We learn that in the next sentence when it says, however, since specific benefits can be attributed to movies and plays, both forms will endure. So, specific benefits to both. Okay, so we're going to be looking at movies and plays, and we're going to be looking at the attributes of one, and the other attribute means feature or something about it. And our point, remember how we always have to make a point, is that both forms will endure, which means both will continue. One isn't going to stop and the other one continue. Both are going to continue. That is the point of our essay. That is what we're proving by comparing and contrasting. Let's go to the next page of the essay. Okay, first off, we're talking about movies. Specifically, as we'll see in point number 3, the advantages, or why movies are better than plays. That's what this first paragraph is going to be about. So, let's read. Movies undoubtedly have some advantages over theater. Our first sentence has said what we're going to be talking about. Movies undoubtedly have some advantages over theater. So we're contrasting, first off, and we're talking about how movies are better. So let's keep reading. For one thing, movie tickets are cheaper than theater tickets. We've made a difference here. We've contrasted. Movie tickets are less expensive than theater tickets. Movie showings are also more convenient for audiences. One movie can be shown in more places and more often than an individual play. Okay, we have discussed why movies are better than plays. They're cheaper, you can put them on in more places at the same time, easier to show to a lot of people than plays. Cool, we've set this up. Next up, we need to give examples. So you can't just say movies are less expensive. You need to prove, or what we're going to do in the next paragraph, we're going to prove more places more often. So we've said that that happens, but now we need to prove how that happens. So, furthermore, movie settings have many advantages over theater settings. For instance, one scene can take place in New York, and the very next second, the scene can shift to Paris. Settings can seem more authentic because they're filmed on location or on a realistic set. Movie makers can also use special effects to create imaginary worlds. They can show dinosaurs chasing humans across the screen, or whole cities being toppled by an earthquake. So here we have given specific examples of how movies are better than plays. They have better locations, they give the people making them more options, they have special effects. We've shown how they are better. Okay? So let's keep moving. So, now let's read the next paragraph. Unlike film, a play production is limited to the stage on which it's performed. Okay, now we've switched topics here. We've gone from movies to plays. However, actors and audiences in a theater share a special intimacy or connection that cannot be achieved in a movie theater. At times, actors talk directly to the audience. This is possible in theater because the performance is live. The intimacy shared by the audience and actors make this entertainment vehicle ideal for expressing emotion. While limited in its ability to create exciting action, the theater excels in conveying human drama. Okay, so this is kind of complicated, so let's go through this. So, point number 5. This writer follows a clear subject-by-subject organizational pattern. First movies, then plays. Great point. Other option, use feature by feature, which we've talked about earlier, and we'll go back over. First, though, let's look. Okay, they start off this paragraph with the phrase, unlike film. Brilliant. What have we established here? We have said we are going to talk about the differences between film or movies and plays. So we start off by saying, unlike film. So that means we're going to talk about differences now. A play production is limited to the stage on which it's being performed. Now, in the last paragraph, if you remember, we talked about how, let's go back to the slide, Movies can be in New York and the next second go to Paris because they can film on location. So remember that we talked about that. Now we're talking about, wait, plays can only be on a stage. So that's a limitation. That's a difference right there. One than the other. Okay. However, actors and audiences in a theater share a special intimacy that cannot be achieved in a movie theater. Remember, we talked about how movie theaters can play the same movie all around the world at the same time. Here it says, though, since it's actors and actresses in one place at one time, they share something special that movies don't have. We're talking about differences here, okay? So remember, we're discussing what we talked about in movies, but now we're talking about how plays are different from that. Alright, next. At times, the actors talk directly to the audience. This sentence supports the one before it. Since we said actors and audiences have a special intimacy, this sentence goes on to say the actors talk to the audience, talking about that connection. Okay, this is possible in a theater because it's performed live. Once again, movies are recorded, plays are live. We're discussing the differences between the two. The intimacy shared by the audience and the actors makes this entertainment vehicle ideal for expressing emotion. Okay, guys, what we're talking about here is how we have differences. And the last slide, talked about how movies can have special effects and they can go all sorts of places and it can give more realistic feels to stories. But now we're talking about how plays can show emotion. So we discussed advantages of movies, now advantages of plays. Sets around the world and special effects for movies, now we have emotions for plays. Our last sentence. While limited in its ability to create exciting action, which we just talked about, the theater excels in conveying human drama. That kind of restates the sentence before it, but that is important. Create explicit or very obvious connections between the two. So, limited in its ability to create exciting action. We talked about exciting action in movies, so now we're saying how it's different. It's limited. It can't do it very well. The theater excels in conveying human drama. So now we're saying this is how it's different. Theater talks about drama, movies talk about action. If you look at these two paragraphs, we have basically talked about the same thing. We've gone over the same sorts of subjects. What we talked about in the movie section, we then talked about when we talked about plays. We stayed on topic. This essay isn't the best for explaining this, but it does stay on topic. What we talked about with movies, we talked about with plays later on. Movies can be everywhere all the time. Plays are only in one place. Movies can have lots of different settings, New York, Paris, whatever. Plays only have one stage. Movie makers can use special effects to make it really cool. Plays can't, but they can create more drama. Okay, so we've talked about one, then we talk about the other. Alright, moving on. Another advantage of the play, so we're still talking about plays, another advantage of a play is that it is a dynamic production capable of growing and changing. Okay, if you look at number 6, it says uses transitional phrase. Transitional phrase right here. Another advantage of a play. Brilliant. It says we are continuing the last paragraph into this one. Another advantage of a play. Transitional phrase. Important. It keeps the river of the essay flowing. Okay. Next up. Once a movie is released, or right here, it is finished and cannot be changed. But a play can be modified and adapted over time. For example, in the Gilbert and Sullivan play, The Mikado, a song originally written to criticize contemporary politicians is updated in new performances to include attacks on modern officials. Okay, so now we're continuing to talk about the differences between movies and plays. The difference here is, though, we're talking about a difference that we have not talked about in movies. But it's okay. You can do this a little differently, but this is still okay. Okay, so we're talking about plays. When a movie is made, it's finished. You don't change a movie later on. But a play, you can. So, they give an example of a Gilbert and Sullivan play that was made to criticize or make fun of politicians from Gilbert and Sullivan's day. So Gilbert and Sullivan made fun of politicians from when they were alive. But because it's a play and because we can change it, nowadays it still makes fun of politicians, but it makes fun of our politicians. So plays can be updated, but movies can't. So we've talked about a difference. A specific kind of difference, we've talked about an advantage. Something better about plays than movies. Because if you remember, way back at the beginning, the original idea was that movies are better than plays. So now we're talking about how plays are better than movies, which will go to prove our point. Our point is, though movies and plays are vastly different, in some ways they're much alike. We're continuing comparison now to keep proving our point, which is going to come a little bit later. Though movies and plays are vastly different in some ways, they're very much alike. Both are meant to entertain, both tell a story, both deal with basic human nature and moral issues, both provide a wide range of genres, which means different types of film like comedy, horror, romance. Comedies, war stories, love stories, and mysteries are all presented on stage and on the big screen. Here we go. Up until now, we've been talking about differences. Now we're talking about similarities. And since the similarities are pretty obvious, this paragraph isn't very long. We go over them very quickly. Both are meant to entertain, both tell a story, both deal with basic human nature and moral issues. These are obvious things that most people already know about plays and movies. You should say them, but you should say them quickly, which this essay does a very good job of. So, we've talked about the differences. Now we've talked about the similarities. Now lastly, in our conclusion paragraph, we're going to go back to our original point. Why did we write this? What are we trying to talk about here? What are we trying to prove? Movies and plays have different appeals. Movies are cheaper and more convenient and have a greater range of visual effects than plays. Live theater provides a more intimate setting and the possibility for human interaction. Live theater can change and adapt in response to audience reactions. However, both strive to entertain and tell a good story and to deal with basic human issues. For that reason, each medium will continue to find an audience. This paragraph has a lot in it, so let's break it down. Let's start at the end. We're going to work backwards. Okay, the last part here. If you go back to the beginning and you remember our point was that movies are not going to replace plays. Plays will still exist. The last part of this paper, these last two sentences say, however, both strive to entertain, to tell a good story, and to deal with basic human issues. For that reason, each medium will continue to find an audience. There we go. We have stated what the essay has shown. This last little bit. However, both strive to entertain, to tell a good story, and to deal with basic human issues. For that reason, each medium will continue to find an audience. Basically saying, movies will not replace plays, which is the whole point of this paper. Okay, but this paragraph has more in it. What the first part of this paragraph has is a summary, or saying again, what you talked about in the paper. Your conclusion paragraph should always do this. It should say what you already have said, and then say your point. It's kind of like your introduction paragraph in reverse. In your introduction paragraph, you say what you're going to say, and then how you're going to say it. And then in your conclusion paragraph, you say what you've already said and your point. Okay? So, movies and plays have different appeals. This is a transition sentence. It takes what we've been talking about, movies and plays, and says that they have different appeals, different things people like about them. So this sets up this paragraph. It takes us from the last one into this one. Movies are cheaper, more convenient, and have a greater range of visual effects than plays. We are restating in one sentence what we said about movies. Next sentence. Live theater provides a more intimate setting and the possibility for human interaction. In one sentence, we have said what we've said about plays. In It's going to continue. Live theater can change and adapt in response to audience reaction. Again, we're already saying what we've said about plays. Now, we restated what we said. Here's what we said about movies. Here's what we said about plays. And then we go into our point. However, both strive to entertain, to tell a good story, to deal with basic human issues. For that reason, each medium will continue to find an audience. Okay, guys, what did we do here? We were comparing movies and plays, first off. Our point was to prove that plays will not be replaced by movies. And while doing that, show the differences and similarities between the two. So what we did was, we said what we were going to talk about, then we talked about movies, then we talked about plays, then we said our final point. Great way to organize an essay. We talked about one, we talked about the other, we kept on topic, so if we talked about how movies can have many locations, but plays can only have one, we kept that together. If we talked about how movies have special effects and plays don't, we kept that together. We talked about how plays have human drama that movies don't. We kept them together. We kept on point, on topic. So now that we've seen this essay, whoops, hold on, we're going to move on to practicing. Okay, writing exercise, and we're going to go over this. Love. What you see here are two sculptures. One by Auguste Rodin, the French sculptor. It's called The Kiss. And the other one is by Robert Indiana, an American sculptor, and it's called Love. Okay, what significant characteristics do these two sculptures share? And do they share enough to establish a basis for comparison? Okay, let's figure this out. What do these two things share? Number one, they're both about love. Number two, they're both sculptures. But they are different. So, being about love and both being sculptures, is that enough to compare the two of these? Yes. They have enough in common because they are both sculptures and they share the same subject that we can compare them. Because now we're going to talk about how they are different. How the kiss is different from the love sculpture. Alright. So, in your journal, which you don't have to do this, we'll do this together, create a Venn diagram to list the similarities and differences of these two works of art. We'll do this all together. Okay, so what is similar about these and what is different? So look at these two pictures really closely. What is similar is a little harder. It's very simple. They're both about love. They're both sculptures. Because those two things are simple and obvious, let's focus more on the differences. Okay, so first, the Rodin, the kiss, has two people kissing. And the love is just the word love spelled out. So we can talk about one is made out of marble, the kiss is made out of marble. The love sculpture is made out of iron. One has no color. One is very colorful. One shows two people. One just shows a word. You see there's tons of differences that we can talk about here. So, similar, they're sculptures. They're about love. Different, one is made out of marble. One is made out of iron. One shows people. One shows a word. The two of them work together. Okay, what general statement could you make about these two sculptures? Okay, what general statements can we make? Cool, alright. What general statement can you make about these two sculptures? Okay, we already discussed this. They are both sculptures. They are both about love. They both express the idea of love. That is the simple thing. Do the points you listed provide enough for this general statement? Question? It's a little more complicated. Because these are sculptures, sculptures are kind of they're art. So, let's go over what we can say to support the idea that both of these represent love. Okay? So, Rodin, the kiss, this one, has two people kissing. Does that remind you of love? Yes, of course. This one over here is the word love spelled out. Does that remind you of love? Yes. Okay, so our statement could be, Both sculptures remind us of love. Okay? Now, do they both? Yes. Okay. We're good. Next up. Write a short comparison contrast essay on the following. You don't have to do this. We'll just talk about it. How does each sculpture convey the idea of love? Which one do you believe conveys this idea more efficiently? Why? Or effectively? Which one's better at it? So, let's think about this, guys. We have two sculptures about love. One is two people kissing. One is the word love spelled out. Which one do you think is better at showing love? Is two people kissing remind you more of love, or just the word love spelled out? There is no correct answer to this, but what you can say is this. You can say, okay, the kiss, this one, shows two people. It is very obvious. Two people kissing means love. The word love spelled out is a little weirder. It isn't as obvious. It's just the word love. So you can talk about one shows humans, one just shows the word, one is more classical, one is very romantic, and one isn't. The word love just spelled out it's more abstract. What you need to do is find what is different about them, what is the same, and figure out which one is better at showing love. Now I think the giant love statue is, because the kiss could mean many things. It could be more like, it could be about an old play, it could be about a story, but the word love is very simple. That is all it is just love. So to me, the simplicity, the fact that it isn't two people, makes it better. So the difference I'm comparing is there's two people in one. There are no people in the other. And for me, because there are no people, it is better at its job. See what I'm saying here? So, that's parallelism. So we'll get to this in a second. Alright, what you need to do whenever you have two ideas is look at what is the same, what is different, and what you want to say about them. So here, I want to say that the love sculpture on the right is better at expressing the concept of love than the kiss. And the reason is because it doesn't have people in it. There we go. So that is simple. That is the point you want to do. These two things are actually very, very difficult to compare because art is very... So you have to think about it. It's much easier to work with things like movies and plays. But think about how these two are different, how these two are the same, and how they express the concept of love, and which one is better at it. Okay? One last little point before we go is the concept of parallelism. Parallelism is the use of matching nouns, verbs, phrases, or clause to express the same or similar ideas. Okay? This is kind of complicated. But the next sentence is from the very, very, very famous book, The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Now, what does that mean? Well, the book is about two cities, Paris and London. And at the time, in London, everything was great, so it was the best of times. At the same time, in Paris, everything was really bad. It was the worst of times. We have only changed one word in the sentence, best to worst, but we have set up a comparison between the two. Parallelism is this concept where we have basically the same two things, you just change one little thing, and it sets up our comparison. So, London, it was the best of times. Paris, it was the worst of times. We set up a comparison on how London was better and Paris was worse, but the way we've done it, we've only used one word. You don't have to use this in your essay, but if you do, it will sound really, really, really good. This will help you become better writers if you use words and phrases like this. So, best, worst. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Alright guys, we've gone over a lot of material today. Let's go back real quick and remember what we have learned. Comparison and contrast essays aren't easy. They can be very complicated. So what you always need to remember is a couple things. Number one, alright, this is probably the best one. Number one, what you gotta have is a subject that you can compare and contrast. For example, don't do dogs and the moon. You cannot compare and contrast them. Or you can, but your essay wouldn't make any sense. Pick two things that go together, such as plays and movies. Next, you need to have a point to your essay. Remember in our sample one, the point was movies are not better than plays. Both are good and both will continue. So, we have plays, we have movies, which are similar, and we have a point that movies are not better than plays. They're both the same. So, now what you need to do is pick things to talk about that prove your point, but prove how they're similar and different. So, what did we talk about? We talked about the setting. Movies can be all around the world, in New York, Paris, whatever. Plays can only be in one place. A difference. Next, we talked about how, what did we talk about? We talked about how, movies have big special effects, like explosions and dinosaurs. Plays don't. But then we talked about how plays can be updated. You can keep making new ones, but movies always stay the same. We also talked about how plays, because the actors are there, can interact, can talk with the audience, so it creates more human drama. What we've done is we've talked about these points. But what all those subjects have done, what the setting, the special effects, the human drama, and the updatability have proven is that movies and plays are both still good. Movies do not replace plays. Okay? And I know this is complicated, but go back over your notes. Reread these if it's confusing. You can actually ask me questions too, and I'll happily answer them. But remember, pick two things that you can compare, figure out what is different, figure out what is the same, and figure out what you can learn from that. So, movies and plays, setting, human emotion, special effects, updatability. What do we learn? That movies and plays are both still important. Simple. Once you have that, you just fill in the details, and writing's nice and easy. So, this is complicated, I know, this is difficult, but reread these notes, practice a little bit, and I'm sure you guys will do great. Does anyone have any questions over this? Don't worry about it? Okay, guys, thank you so much for paying attention. Have a great day. Good luck writing these essays. I'm sure you'll do great. Just remember those few rules, and you'll be fine. Have a good one. Cool. Cool, thank you. Yeah, all right. I'll dodge out.